Hello and welcome to this very special episode of How, the Shared Living podcast, the Summer Sessions. This is a mini-series of special episodes with some very interesting and relevant guests to get you through the summer. Maybe you're listening on holiday, maybe you're driving your kids to childcare, or maybe you're on your usual commute. I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Student Housing Consultancy.
And yes, we are a host down this week as Deanie takes a well-earned holiday, but we didn't want you to miss out on what will be a great episode. However you listen, we're delighted you're with us today to hear from Honor Barratt from Birchgrove, a name many of you will recognise as someone who has burst onto the shared living scene in the past year, or has she? Honor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, Sarah and Dan. I wish I was listening to this on holiday. That would be glorious. My name is Honor. I'm the Chief Exec of Birchgrove, which I would say, in summary, is build to rent for old people.
Fantastic, and we're really excited to delve into more of that quite unknown sector. Well done on being shortlisted for the Property Week Inspiring Women Awards. Very exciting, hot off the press.
That was funny, wasn't it? Thank you, Sarah.
And I guess that's a good place to start because, to be frank, when we were trying to get you to be a guest on Housed, you were worried that you had had too much exposure and people are sick of hearing from you. Whilst I can confirm that is certainly not the case, have you really just appeared in the sector over the last year? And why is it that we're just hearing about you now?
Okay, there could be a couple of theories. First theory is you two haven't been paying attention. Maybe I've been here all along. Second theory is that in later living, we are such underachievers. It's taken us so long to get to where we've got to that normal resi is only just waking up to later living. That could be a theory. Is it that in property there is sometimes a bit of complacency because we can build things and fill it and you don't need to go and look around to complicate your lives because you can probably make some very good money doing what you do, so you don't have to look around? Or my favourite theory would be that you guys have finally realised that later living is the sexy bit of the sector and you are just waking up to, God, how much money can be made out of later living? That's my theory, why you've only just heard of it.
It's been really good to see later living represented, especially by people like yourself. You're very compelling and engaging, especially on the stage, and very honest and transparent. It's not something that we're really used to in real estate, primarily used to the blue suits of investments. And I think it's really refreshing that you've been able to inject that enthusiasm. Now, I know you're trying to sort of innovate the sector, but why do you think that later living has that reputation of being slightly dull, slightly beige, the antithesis of what you said, the unsexy sector? So what are your thoughts?
Possibly, Dan, the sector sometimes conflates us as all old people are a homogenous mass of over 65s, and the dominating force in the over 65s is probably the care home. So if we all think about care homes, it is dull and beige, in my opinion. I think what's really interesting, people of your age, so Dan and Sarah, how young you are. Dan, you talked about checking your granddad into a later living experience, and it probably was a little bit beige, and it was quite conceivable there were people sitting around watching telly, or even nobody around at all. And so that will set the tone for what you believe it is that I do. And so in your head, I reckon it's still that. And there's quite a lot of damage to be undone there. When you get to my age, my parents live in our Woking community in Birchgrove, and they were never going to settle for that shit. That beige stuff, that wasn't going to work for them. So the sector is considered beige, but it's the consumer that's saying, I'm not taking beige anymore.
To be honest, I mean, I've worked in the property sector for 20 years, and I'd say it's probably only in the last 12 to 18 months that I even had an idea of sort of private rented living for the older community. I know it exists in social housing, but I wasn't really aware that it existed in the private sector. And I think anybody that I've talked about it, because I'm like, wow, guess what? There's this whole sector that exists. Everyone always says, well, why would my grandparents sell their house to rent? That seems counterintuitive. So do you think that's kind of one of the issues, is that it's so new that they just can't comprehend why somebody would make that choice?
Yeah, it is really new. And I think if you read the Daily Mail, you're never going to make that choice because you are told constantly that you're defined by your home ownership. And definitely all of us, if you own a home, you've probably made more out of the rising house price than any of us do out of jobs. So why would you stop that sort of gravy train? But what is also true is that home ownership is bloody boring. Once you're 80, it's actually hard. You can't do anything for yourself. Why do we think that home ownership is nirvana? Like, we're the only country in the world who's obsessive about home ownership. And I just think we need to wean ourselves off that. There's nothing wrong with renting. And interestingly for me, Sarah, apparently 30% of all student lets are guaranteed by the grandparents. We're already engaging in the rental sector. We're already being slightly desensitized and going, oh God, maybe this isn't, it's not so tawdry. Maybe it's not so terrifying. But I would definitely say that if you consider renting in your later life, you are weirdly an early adopter. You will not have any friends who've done it. You will be a pioneer. You're being asked to take quite a risk. At the age of 83, you're asking to do something that none of your friends have done. And it is a leap into the unknown. It is a leap of faith. And the Daily Mail is not helping by telling you that you're defined by your home ownership.
When you look at Europe, so many of the older generations, they have rented their houses. Why is it that the UK is so anti-renting, do you think? And I don't know, it is quite easy, and I do blame the Daily Mail for a lot of things, but do you think there's an appetite to change that? And how can we go about changing that sort of negative attitude towards renting in later life?
Okay, so this is where I think I really wanted to meet you two. So I'm like, you two spend your lives thinking about this just as much as I do. What is this stigma and how do we blow that out of the water? What do you think?
So one of the things that I think is quite interesting is, and I hadn't really thought about this until I met this guy who rents. He's a single parent. I think he was in his late 20s. And he rents, and he was telling me he'll never be able to afford to buy, and he's kind of fine with that. He gets to live in a great house in a great location, and he wouldn't be able to afford to buy because he earns a good amount of money, but not enough to save a big deposit to buy somewhere. So he's cool. He's got a good job. He's bringing up his daughter in a great place, great school. But then he said to me, but what happens when I'm older? How do I carry on renting when I'm not earning any money, when I'm retired? And the problem, I think, you've got this, and it's not just later living rental, it's BTR as well. We've kind of created a really high-end product around renting. And then you've got social housing, and you don't have a great deal in between at either end of the market. So I'm talking about PBSA and later living. So I guess maybe that's why it's a dirty word, because people don't understand how they can sustain that lifestyle. And I don't know how they do it in Europe once they retire. Where does their money come from to, enable them to carry on renting? I suspect it's probably cheaper in a lot of European cities for a start. So they have more disposable income. So maybe they've been able to save more. Maybe they have great pensions and they're able to continue to rent. Maybe they have better social health care that means that they're not scared of what will happen when they can't afford it. But, is it all of that?
I think it's all of that. And then I think, and this is a dirty word in rental, but I think they have rent controls. Our housing market, it's like a hot air balloon, isn't it? It's so tight, it's so taut. We're all putting our rents up so much. But I don't believe you get that in a town like Frankfurt. I do think that there's rent control, there is protection. Your rent will have to go up in the same way that your income is going up. And you're less under threat of just being evicted because your landlord can get more money from somewhere else. So as much as it is slightly terrifying for us as a rental industry to be looking down the barrel of those things, for me, giving someone like your acquaintance, who's a young man raising his children, giving him some certainty of tenure, I think is really important, isn't it? We do need those renters' protections, that he can't just be evicted. And will that take some of the pressure out of this market so that we're not... I feel like I meet loads of people who are minutes away from disaster. Like if you lose your job within about 10 days, you're probably running out of money. And I don't believe that happens in Europe. I do think, as you said, you are able to save a bit more and protect yourself. I get really worried about that, how close so many people are to just the edge at all times. And that feeling of insecurity, of not having... Well, you could call it security of tenure, or you could call it home as the springboard for your life to take risks and have an adventure and try a new thing. If you don't have that solidity of that base, you don't do those things. And then the economy doesn't grow. And I do think that the Labour government does understand that connection between growth comes from a really strong springboard. And the best springboard in the world is a sense of home. It's feeling the security to take the risk.
I do think that marketing has got something to pay for it. And, I'm a marketeer. I haven't directly had the opportunity to market later living marketing or BTR. But from what I've seen, I do think that one of the key messages that's being missed is security of tenure. I see all of these billboards and adverts on the tubes and pages in the Evening Standard, and it's all about the sexy facilities. It's all about the rooftop bar and the gym and the concierge and how many minutes it is from the tube. And that's all fantastic, but I don't see a single message about, and it's not sexy, but, we're not going to kick you out. We're not going to, sell from underneath you. And we're probably not going to put our rents up 20% within a year.
But we all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, don't we? And the base is shelter. Like, why do we not market to the most fundamental needs in the world? We're told all this stuff down at the bottom, that's the most important. But I guess you two probably haven't written a marketing message to the bottom of that triangle.
No, and also, like we always talk that, BTR is a industry terminology. What is the terminology for rented later living? It doesn't flow off the tongue. So I don't think that, I see things like built for renters, rented property, but I still think that if you're looking at some hoarding going past a new development, I don't think the general public are taking that in. I think you just assume that's another high-rise apartment block with really expensive apartments to buy. I'm down in Bournemouth at the moment, and because I'm a marketeer and I'm obsessed with property, I read every single bit of hoarding, and there's one that I saw that didn't mention parking, and I was like, well, I think they've missed a trick there, because if you were going to buy in a really expensive apartment here, and my dad, who I was with, was just like, oh, I didn't even notice that, because maybe the general public don't. And as marketeers or as people working in the sector, you might think things are obvious. But actually, I don't know if people are just assuming if you're building apartments, they must be to buy. And therefore, it kind of doesn't really matter what you're saying on it because they're not reading it.
I don't know as much about BTR as you two do, but I wonder whether you see the over-amenitization of it. And that's going crazy for pooch parlours and rooftop bars. And you want to drive past, you want to see parking. It's like fairly basic. I don't know whether the marketeers in us are building bars that are never going to have anybody in them because it's an important part of the sales journey, or we believe it's an important part of the sales journey. And I think in my places, if somebody walks in and says, oh gosh, this is luxurious, I think I've done it wrong, because I don't want them to think luxury. I want them to feel, oh, I could make myself at home here. I want them to kick their shoes off and curl up on the sofa. I don't want them to go, oh my God, look at that rooftop bar. So it's really funny, isn't it, about those messages that we respond to. And certainly when we launched our first development in Sidcup, we put the word rent on the hoardings, and then just loads of people called out and says, do you take housing benefit? And you were like, oh gosh, that word rent is really nuanced. It means something that it shouldn't, but it does. So we had to redo all the hoardings, take the word rent off, and start that journey from the very beginning. We couldn't even say the word rent until we committed to always be 40 minutes in front of the customer before we say the word rent. Because if you say it any earlier, they're out the door. There's like, oh no, that's not for me. I had one amazing old buffer called Peter who sort of recoiled and said, well, Honor, I've always thought of myself as an owner. And I said, I know, Peter, but you're 87. Does it make sense to give me £750,000 for an apartment? Or does it make sense to take this apartment month by month? It's funny, isn't it? But I think we are slowly knocking away at that. And actually, Dan, where your grandfather ended up in Maxstone, they're now doing rental. And they're such a behemoth of the industry that actually if they start spending marketing pounds against the word rent, I will benefit.
Yeah, that will change the industry. And I think we're terrible at categorising things. We come up with acronyms like, we've got PBSA for purpose-built student accommodation, BTR built to rent, and then I think you've got later living, retirement living, later living rental, and then you sort of start thinking old people's home. And I think there is a bit of an identity crisis ultimately for the later living sector, as there is for pretty much every other sector as well. But I think more so in that rental piece, because it feels like it's a lot newer. People aren't quite used to it yet. But you're right, it makes a lot of sense. Why would you, at 87 years old, into your 80s, want the hassle of buying a new place, moving all your stuff in, etc.? Your villages, are they furnished, each of the apartments?
So I believe that to feel at home, have a sense of home, you should be like a cat, and you can go and spray up against all the walls and make it just like your own home. And I think the human version of spraying against the wall is to put your own pictures up and put change the carpet, whatever you want to do. It's your home. I'm not going to penalise you for any of it, because the more you feel at home, the less likely you are to turn against me and hand me a notice. So I'm in the cat spraying strategy. I'm never going to penalise you for doing that.
I think that's really important. It's something in student and BTR, I think, that we're not that good at, because if you leave blue tack marks on the wall, you'll get fined, and if there are marks, then you might lose your deposit or whatever. Now, we are building homes and creating homes, but these are homes typically for 6 months, 12 months, depending on the contract. What sort of contract lengths do you typically see? And that's not me sort of trying to eke out your life expectancy.
I've never run a 400 unit BTR building, but if you did allow them to put blue tack marks up, would you get more tenure? Or do you not want the tenure because every time they leave, you disproportionately put the rent up in a way that you can't if they're there? So a churn is not to be mourned in BTR, because the next person who comes in is paying 15% more. Is that why there's no blue tack? I don't know. I don't run one of those buildings, but I would love to get 4.5 years out of mine, so I let them put blue tack.
Do you know what, though? That's a really interesting point. I grew up, I was a victim of the recession in the 90s. We lost our house, and I grew up for the most part of my youth in rented properties. And we stayed in one, I think we lived in one for like 7 years or something. It was home as far as I knew. I didn't know whether we rented or bought, because I don't know, like 12 years old, you don't know about these things. But my mum painted my bedroom purple, and it was terrible. Like, she should not have been allowed with a paintbrush. But I loved it. That's how I wanted my room. And then over the purple, I had Take That posters all over the walls, because I was a teenager. I wanted to feel, and I don't know that I ever expressed this, but I think my mum recognised that I needed to spray up the walls and make, an identity for myself and make myself feel at home. But the landlady went mad, and I think we had to pay to get it redone. And it's, that stuck with me, because that was my room. That was personal to me. And I think that, any generation that's grown up either renting or knowing someone that's rented, and this could probably go into HMO living, graduate living, student accommodation, they've probably got this fear of, oh my God, I can't put a shelf up. And I'd say, most of the properties that I've ever rented or, been involved in renting, you sometimes feel like you've improved it, or actually, that would be so much better if there was a bookshelf there and everything.
Who doesn't want a bookshelf? I just think that your mother would have known that penalty's coming, and then there was a decision point in her head. Do I try and make my baby feel at home and incur the wrath of the landlady? Like, we've all done it. I remember putting in a cat flap thinking, well, for me, I have to have a cat. And I put it in knowing that I was going to get penalised. Why do you want to stop people making themselves feel at home? But that was really, really interesting about what your mother did to make you feel like that was your palace.
Yeah. But I listened to the Newsagents podcast a while ago. I think I posted about it on LinkedIn because I found it so fascinating. And they were talking about the problem in the UK with our population, and that we're not seeing population growth like other countries are seeing it. So they interviewed a load of people about why that might be. And I mean, they obviously clearly picked people that matched the narrative that they were trying to portray. But interviewees kind of mainly said the reason that they're not having children is because buying a house is so expensive, and they want a secure home to bring their children up in. And I was literally shouting at my headphones, because I was thinking, why is it that owning your own home equals security? And none of them said, actually, I am going to have children because I have got an amazing place that I rent that's really secure. And, maybe it's a generational thing, and it will come once people see their grandparents living in these places. But it's probably not so much the age currently, if that makes sense. There's all this kind of baggage about renting.
I don't know whether that is about renting, Sarah, or whether... this is a ridiculous sentence. My favourite waitress at Soho House, who I adore, and she and I have known each other like 15 years, and she was telling me that she has 2 kids and she's married, and she just was renting a new, and it cost $2,800 a month. And so her girls had to share a bedroom, and they were living with her brother-in-law. So they had to get 3 adult incomes into that flat to make it work, and the girls had to share a room. And I know she's a waitress, and I'm thinking, how do you get to 2,800 quid a month? It is insane. It's what. So I don't think it is about, I think it's whether you're renting or a homeowner, having an extra child is it absolutely has to be thought about. And as a result, we're all sitting on this Ponzi scheme that we all know to be a shit ton of old people at the top and not enough young people at the bottom. And we're stumbling into an apocalypse where there's not enough young people at the bottom to pay for our social security. We have to sort that out. There's a bit of me that thinks if we can take out the stigma of renting, if you own your own home while you are child raising, and then you do liquidate the house early 60s, free up that housing stock for more families, and then you take that rental income and you pay for your own death, your own care, your own retirement, instead of just expecting the state to kick in every time you get dementia. I think that's the right way to do it. So there's a bit of me that feels like the rental model will play out in the end, and we will be at more than 50% of us are renting in our later lives, because it's the only way to pay for your death. It's the only way to cover your dementia costs. There's no point sitting in a £1 million house.
Honor, can you share that stat about the numbers of empty beds in houses? Because I just think that's the catalyst to solve the housing crisis, I think.
I think it will single-handedly solve the housing crisis. But as we go to bed tonight, in the homes of the over 65, there are 9 million bedrooms with nobody sleeping in them. And it breaks me that is a reality when there are 300,000 people sofa surfing. It doesn't need to be like that. And to a certain extent, us in later living, we have to take responsibility for just how bloody tawdry we've been in our development, how we need to go faster. Because if we could just give the oldies somewhere to move into, they would happily free up those family homes and let my favourite waitress at Soho House move into a family home instead of having to live with her brother-in-law and the girls sharing a bedroom. I mean, there's so many problems to fix, aren't there? But I wish that somebody would think about that under occupation of the bedrooms.
I think that's a great point. It's not really something that I think the real estate industry fully considers. And it was great that at the Operational Real Estate Festival, where I saw you on the stage, that gets us all out of our silos. Me being student housing consultancy, I also have BTR and co-living clients, but nothing necessarily in later living. And I think that is a serious opportunity to solve the housing crisis. It's just how do you get that message out there?
Or does everybody in property make more money out of the housing crisis? Like, is it in our interests that there's a pressure cooker and you can whack up a build to rent unit and someone will pay you £3,000 a month? Like, is property actually motivated to fill those bedrooms? Because filling those bedrooms doesn't involve building a shit ton of new towers, does it?
It takes them out of the rental market in that sense, but eventually would put them in later living. So there's that sort of 20-year generational lag time between them, going through into that later living. And I know why you're cynical about that. And yes, you're right in terms of the lack of returns that you would see, given that everybody is desperate to get BTR off the ground. I was in Leeds last week. There's a pipeline of 10,000 PBSA beds and 10,000 BTR beds, and the rents effectively start at about £1,000 a month for a studio, and realistically, I think the average is probably about £1,600 a month. So yeah, there's a lot of people making quite a lot of money out of those sectors. Is it in their interests to get people renting later in life and release that stock back to the market? Probably not. And it would have to come from the government or institutional investors to take a stand and say, right, we're going to control all of this. We're going to put those rent controls in place. But we've seen what happens with that when you have rent controls put in place. The cranes just stop.
Absolutely, we have. And when you say cynical, I actually not sure that I agree that is the position. I just wanted to suggest, and I don't want rent control because I'm part of a stable where they have a problem asset that they have a £18 million investment north of the border, and I don't know what they're going to do with it because no one's going to fund them. I do think though that you mentioned that institutional money, and I'm from a social impact fund. I think that those people do genuinely feel that the responsibility of that money. So I present every year to the pension funds who invest with Bridges Fund Management. And they're people for like Liverpool Council, Manchester Council, and they turn up and they ask Bridges more questions about how are you making the world a better place than they ask about their returns, because they genuinely see the responsibility that they have with these billions of pound funds to move the dial on some of this stuff. So I do think, I was just being slightly provocative before, I do think that the weight of the money is trying to fix this. I do think that they are uncomfortable with the fact that you have to share bedrooms.
I don't know. I don't know if there is that will yet within real estate to have a look at the number of Article 9 funds that you've got. There's minimal. And actually, I was speaking to an investor yesterday. I was speaking to 3 different investors yesterday in London, in and around St James's, and just saying to them, where are all the Article 9 funds? Where are the funds that are focused on doing good first and giving returns second? And it's because the returns haven't been that easy to come by in PBSA or BTR for the past sort of year or so. It's cost of capital, cost of development, etc., cost of operations, utilities, and so I think everybody is back in that mindset of we need to see the returns again. So let's put an Article 8 fund maybe would be better first and foremost. And
did nobody think that social impact is the thing that drives operational efficiency? That it's not the cherry on top, it's the thing that delivers the returns. It's not a nice to have, it's fundamental to. So I have sitting on my board, he turns up and he always asks me the question I don't know the answer to. He's like a sort of rogue element. I don't know, some time ago he was like, I'm not going to invest in a business that doesn't pay living wage. So at the time we were paying something like £11.95 an hour and we had to go to £13.05 an hour. Thanks, Phil. Like, you just tanked my EBITDA. But the crazy result in staff retention, I mean, it just went through the roof. He knew that was going to be the impact. It wasn't because he just wanted to be nice and shiny. It's because he wanted those girls to work for us for 3 years before we then promoted them. It's really, I just think that those funds who want the returns need to understand that impact is about returns. It's the way to get the return.
I think we're a way off in PBSA and BTR in particular. I think we're a way off of understanding a green premium for any kind of ESG measures on sale or exit or acquisition, or the understanding of the operational benefits of doing the right thing. Now, I also run an ESG consultancy specializing in real estate, and I have clients that come to me and say, we just want to pay lip service to this first and foremost. So just give us the bare minimum and that's all that we want to do. And then just give us a nice story to talk about. And it's my job to then tell them exactly how they can do a good job. Well, so what I'm trying to do is educate them along the way. Like, we know that not every client's going to come to us and say, we've written in these incredible ESG values into our company and we want to absolutely live those values. We want to do the right thing. And then if we make some money doing it, then great. Most of the clients that we tend to see come to us with that alternative approach, saying, we don't really understand ESG. We need a bit of help. And, can you just get us to that kind of base level? And then we can help them innovate. We can help them pioneer. And then all of a sudden, 2 years down the line, they suddenly realize, well, we're leading the sector here. I think there's still a fundamental misunderstanding of ESG and of what that means to real estate, but also on how it can generate exceptional returns now, because you can get better lending terms as well, and you can also run at a better operational cost.
The people who are listening to this will need to be told that 3 days ago was like the hottest day in the millennium, and I went to meet the chief exec of Dagenham and Barking, who then insisted on taking me on a 90-minute walking tour of Dagenham and Barking with sweat pouring down my back. And he wanted to show me, I'm just never going to get there. I can't do Passive House. And he said, there's now this thing, Passive House Light. He said that building over there, he pointed at 54 units. He said it cost 8% more to build. And he said in January, the heating and electricity bill for that whole block was £17. I mean, that it blows your mind, doesn't it? It would be £17 for 54 units and heating electricity, and it costs 8% more to build on Passive House Light. And I don't think Passive House Light is actually a thing that we're supposed to talk about, but it's, for me, as a rental model, maybe this is it, Dan. Maybe for sales guys don't have to innovate because they sell that unit and bugger off. But us rental guys, to run a building for 17 quid. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put some extra money in my construction. So now I'm like, shit, how do I do pass? Like, that is social impact delivering epic EBITDA, isn't it?
But is the ESG thing actually potentially where you might see more people going into rental? Because houses that these older people are living in right now, if they hold on to them, we know that from a maintenance point of view, they're going to deteriorate. And not only that, but if they want to rent them out individually, we know now that the Labour government are putting, EPCs back on track. But also, I imagine at some point to even sell a property, there will be a green premium. It might be 15 years, it might be 20 years, but people aren't going to be boilers, having gas boilers. If all of these old houses have that, how are they going to be able to sell those houses? So I think from listening to other interviews that you've done, Honor, and kind of my understanding of it is you want people to free up those houses before they've run those houses into the ground, and those people won't be able to sell them in the future if they haven't maintained them, and if they haven't insulated them, and if they haven't changed the boilers.
I think so. I don't know how to track this. I'm really, one day I hope that an amazing postgrad will get in touch and say, I know how to track this, Honor. But I genuinely believe that the people who move in with us have typically lived in that family home for 33 years, and they do have a gas boiler and they've got nothing, no insulation in the roof and all the. But the family that buys that home then invests in it and brings it up to an EPCA, and all the gas is taken out. So I get this like serotonin hit. Is it serotonin? Every time someone moves in, I think, 2.3 bedrooms. Now I've got someone sleeping in it. That house is now more sustainable because someone's going to invest in it, the house that you've just left. And your daughter, who spent her whole bloody life being your carer, not her whole life, the last 5 years being your carer, is now free to go back to work and be an economically productive female again. So I'm like, oh my God, all these benefits. If I could just get you to move to us. We have this thing the other day. This amazing old duffer fell in front of me. And normally we would have to call the NHS and they'd say, okay, it's going to be about 6 hours because it's not an emergency, but he's on the floor. So then a member of my staff would lie next to him under a blanket, both had their head on pillows, and she'd sing songs to him, and they'd plug and play I Spy, whatever it takes to get through 6 hours lying on the floor. Wait. And we had this amazing blow up chair like a lilo. You kind of squidge it underneath him and then you blow him up, and in 4.5 minutes he goes to standing. And I was like, now we don't even have to call the NHS. Like, literally, we need nothing now. We're this amazing, self-contained, self-sustaining community. Just let us have a few more of them, and then all these amazing benefits will trickle out. But we just got to go a bit faster.
But you're right, and we were talking before we hit record. That I've just had a few days away with my dad by the south coast, and he would have loved to have lived here and left it too late. When he had an elderly mother back in London where we lived. Then me and my brother, we were teenagers and blah blah blah, and life went on, and he didn't get to move to the seaside. And he would have loved it, and it makes me so sad. But I can see that cycle repeating because I'm sat here by the seaside thinking, oh my God, I just want to live by the beach. But my youngest is 12. I don't know how long. When will he move out of home? And I can just see that cycle, repeating, and you can see how it happens. And if there's anything I've learned from listening to you and others of the sector, it's you want old people to live the life that they should live without the chain around their neck of this big house that needs lots of stuff and lots of maintenance, because they want to leave their children inheritance. And that's really, I think, for a lot of it, all they want. And they don't want to end up with loads of money that they're going to just have to plow into social care. And there's so many cycles that rental later living can solve, really. So we just have to keep having conversations, and please don't go under the radar, Honor, and think that you're being overexposed, because you have to keep talking about this.
Okay, so the marketeer in you, Sarah, after 6 months, we interview everybody who's moved in with us, and it's like a sort of health check. Did it live up to your expectation? And without fail, every one of them say, I wish I'd done it earlier. How do you bottle that, I wish I'd done it earlier, and market to that? Because that's the insight.
it's marketing to the shoulda, woulda, coulda generation in that sense. Like, you know, and I think later living is primed and ready. It's doing well now, but in 20 years' time, maybe slightly less, there will be a massive boost in it, because I think, you know, I'm 42. My generation, I think, is a lot softer and they, you know, we're not as stoic. The British sort of stiff upper lip, just get on with things. I think we will need to be mollycoddled and looked after. But I think we'll want to try and do it on our own terms. And by looked after, I don't mean going to care homes. I think we're going to want those inclusive communities that kind of bring us out of our shells. We saw how dangerous that was during COVID, that everybody was stuck inside. And I think that's where that sense of community is really important, especially as you get into later life. We also know how loneliness has such a huge impact on that as well. I think some of it is going to come down to a mindset shift, which will happen over time. And some of it, you know, over renting and over what the options are, and really clearly displaying those options. And people like you are the perfect, you know, you're the perfect poster woman for it, because of the fact that, definitely, just because you're very articulate, you're able to really openly talk to them on their level. You know, you're happy to swear like a trooper, and I think that talks to people on their level, rather than it, you know, like I said, just being that sort of corporate shill effectively. And I think we've got to make sure that the brands are super appealing, and that we're taking down any barriers to entry that people might feel. Older people are getting much better with their internet literacy effectively. But how do you then show what we see in student housing, for example, where we have marketplaces that will compare and contrast all of the options for PBSA? Every PBSA seems to be branded differently. They have different values and different points of attraction. And I see it in Birchgrove, and you can see it in any of your competitors as well. I do think that the branding is going to be absolutely key. I'm sure Sarah will come onto this shortly. But also those routes to market. So the marketplaces, one thing that I did a bit of research, obviously before this shock horror, I do actually research, but I found Lottie, I think it was lottie.org, and they're obviously comparing and contrasting later living options. And I think the more that we can see things like that, services like that, and that, you know, fully understand that the channels that people are using to look at later living and educate them better, I think that's where that mindset shift will happen a lot quicker. So the more that you can do by getting on stage, by, you know, doing podcasts or explaining exactly what it is, the better. That's the way I see it anyway.
I do have to say, if it takes 20 years, as you predict, I'm going to shoot myself, because it needs to be faster. Like we have to nail this in the next 5 years. We have to get this.
You know, I'm probably thinking about my age and the fact that when I'm 62 in 20 years' time, I will probably be, well, maybe I will be, yeah, I'll probably be thinking about what am I next.
No, you won't, Dan. You're still at work. You're still at work at 62. You need to be at work. Like, this is not about being 62. You're still at work. You've still got your kids. What are you going to say, Sarah?
But still, I think, yeah, you're right. It does need to happen now. That mindset shift does need to happen. So, okay, how do we do that? How do we make that shift?
The customer's doing it, Dan. So the customer is doing that. So, like, we either evolve or we get left behind. So in the Birchgrove cohort at the moment, 85% of my residents are the silent generation, which is the kids, babies born in the war, who say thank you and please, and I don't want to bother you. And if they fall on the floor, they won't press the pedal because they think we're too busy. And they're an easy customer. They're very rewarding to be with. They're lovely. And 15% of our customers are the baby boomers, who, like the other day, one of them was like, I can't believe you don't have a cheese board. I was like, I know, I'm really sorry, Brian. I have a cheese board. I just couldn't believe it. So that oldest baby boomer has turned 80 this year. So we have to evolve or die, because the boomer will not accept a care home. And they are this force of nature, and there's a shit ton of them.
But I think you need to get your residents to speak out more and shine a light on them, and all of those amazing reviews that you have after 6 months of people living there, and how happy they are and how they wish they'd done it earlier. They need to tell more people, and that's what the marketing should say, really, to take away that fear. We started the podcast talking about the fear of rentals, and surely they are the poster people for saying it's not scary, it's bloody amazing. Look at the life that we're we're living, and we wish we'd done it earlier. And, do you need to market to the 80-year-olds? Probably not. You probably need to market to the 60-year-olds or the 42-year-olds like Dan and I, who will be influencing our parents. Like, oh my God, have you heard about this thing? Because, actually, or, I want to move into your house with my family, and can you please move out? And it doesn't mean that you have to sell that home. We'll rent it from you, and you can go and rent somewhere amazing. Maybe you can live in a city. I was just thinking before when Dan was talking about PBSA and BTR in Leeds, is later living rentals in cities the next stage as well? Because if all those people are experiencing city centre rental living and they've loved it, why would they move out, really? Because you've got, I know, yours are in really vibrant communities. You're not putting people out in the sticks. You want them to be part of the community.
In the same way that the three of us are quite different now, we will be that different when we're over 75. And so you actually want to go and live by the sea. I want to live on Marylebone High Street, and I don't know where Dan wants to live. So we need to build something for all three of us. Just because we're over 75 doesn't mean we all homogenise and come together. So that is one thing that the sector needs. With the impetus and the innovation needs to come choice and diversity, because we all want different things. And that's what care homes, I think, didn't do. A care home kind of looks like a care home. It's a bit more expensive or it's a bit cheaper, and that seems to be defined about whether you've got jellyfish in the reception. It doesn't seem to be, not much else changed in care homes. Whereas we need to do diversity of tenure. And
I mean, Honor, we could carry on talking about this for ages, and we haven't really touched the surface, I don't think. And I know, Deanie will be kicking herself that she's not part of this conversation, but she can listen like everybody else. So I think we'll have to wrap it up now. But, I'm sure we'll all see you on the circuit of various different conferences. And please keep talking up about this, because, a lot of the people who are listening, like us, probably have parents that would love to live in a later living rental community that might not know about it. So, I hope that this conversation kind of inspires further conversation and collaboration.
I think this conversation was like supercharged because you were both prepared to bring your personal experiences with your parents and your grandparents to play, because that's exactly where all of us are. That's exactly what we're trying to fix, isn't it? So thank you for bringing those stories.
No problem. A huge thank you to Honor for joining us today. Clearly very busy and changing the world. So thank you for sharing all your wise words with us, and it's very generous of you. Please make sure you're following the Birchgrove story and Honor on LinkedIn, as the sector can learn so much about innovation and challenging what's been done before. Thank you to you all for listening as well. We look forward to bringing you another episode of Housed very soon.